welcome to another Study Notes in Theory CISSP video. This is like a director's cut version. I did a webinar a few weeks ago with one Prabh Nair from INFOSEC TRAIN. He is a fellow CISSP instructor based out of India. I've known Prabh for a long time, since I started this CISSP website thing. He is legit. He is a professional, okay? I know he's a professional because the webinar I did was handled so dang professionally. And you know, I don't really like do those things. You know, webinars, live courses, you know, group chats, or whatever the hell a watch party is. What is that? A watch party. What is that? You know, all Prabh did was ask me to join and talk about my new book and how to think like a manager, since I don't really market myself because I really don't have any time. And Prabh said, hey, do this webinar and I'll handle the rest. Now, this was a relief for me because I didn't have to do anything but prepare for the webinar. That's it. The marketing, the user registration, the banner, and even the moderating of the webinar, Prabh did all that. He managed all that, like an expert too. I just logged on, noticed there were a lot of participants, and he reduced all chat, audio, private messages, anything like that. He just eliminated those from my vision. I had no distractions. Very professional. Thank you again, Prabh. It was a great time. It really was. Again, Prabh Nair, INFOSEC TRAIN, CISSP instructor. Good guy. So what I talked about on that webinar, I just kind of wanted to do it here as a director's cut because of so much more other information that I did not get to mention. And as with all my other CISSP videos, I always start out by saying this was supposed to be just a 30-minute video. I promise it'll be just a 20-minute video, and it winds up being like an hour. Because you're never really done talking about the CISSP. There's always something to add. But before all that, how are you doing? How are you, yes, you, right now, doing? If you're watching this video, you're probably taking the CISSP exam in, like, what? A month? Maybe? 2 months? Maybe a week away from the exam? Boy, that's a stressful time, huh? A week away? Oh, you probably don't even feel ready. You feel like you got your entire life and career on the line with this exam. It's kind of how it felt for me. And if you're one of those who has to take the exam because of your boss, because your boss said you had to, oh man, that's some high pressure. That is not a preferable place to be for the CISSP exam. You need a clear mind for this thing, void of all distractions. Like, if this is an exam you have to pass for your job, it's a little different for you. You have stress upon stress for this one. That's a tough place to be. I won't even pretend to understand what that's like. But you'll do it. You'll pass. You will. I've seen people do it multiple times. If they can do it, you can do it. You're no different than anybody else, especially if you're taking the CISSP exam. You know, no one's heard about this exam. Just the fact that you're attempting this is a big thing. I always say that, and I'll stick with that. You will pass this thing through your own steely determination. Or are you 2 days away? Or are you 1 day away from the exam? Or are you sitting in your car outside the testing center right now, fidgeting with your COVID mask and watching this video right now? I ask you, are you ready? Are you ready for this thing? Because it's happening. You're about to take it. There's no going back. You paid the exam fee. This is either going to make you, or if you let it, it'll break you. So, but, you know, just chill out. Chill out. Just take a deep breath. Like that. You've prepared. Or you are preparing. You've been reading your Cybex, your Sean Harris, your 11th hour. taken thousands of tedious CISSP practice exam questions, participated in countless online group discussions to the extent of which that you can just leave a paper trail of all your hard work spewed all over the internet. Thousands of years from now, when people engage in an internet called the Unisphere across the galaxy, they're going to look back on the legacy of what was our internet, and they'll see your name in various comments and posts and forums and chat groups, and you will have left a trail of your own CISSP legacy. Not to mention, you've also spent a good chunk of money on online video courses or $1,000 boot camps, or were even tempted to Google the words real CISSP exam questions. Where can I get them? Because you just wanted to see if they're around, just because you were curious. But then you quickly changed your mind because it is unbecoming of a security professional to do such things. And you don't feel too good about it either. Because if you cheated with exam dumps, you'd truly never be a CISSP. When people congratulate you and look at you as an inspiration for their own exam, you will feel like a total fraud because deep down inside, you cheated. And after all this hard work, that's just not a risk you want to take. You want to earn this thing. Not to mention, CISSP exam dumps do not exist. They're a myth. The CISSP is awesome like that. It's unlike any other exam. There are no cheat codes. Up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, start is not going to work here. All right? Okay. I am sure that on the course of your journey to the elusive CISSP certification, you have heard countless number of times that you have to think like a manager. As a former person who was also on his quest to the CISSP that was filled with sleepless nights, missing time with my family, not being able to watch the World Cup or the newest Netflix series, and just sacrificing nearly all the time I had, all I heard was, you have to think like a manager. You have to think like a manager. I'm like, okay, but I'm just a network security engineer, a technical person. I have a manager, but how am I supposed to think like him? Am I just supposed to tell people what to do like my manager does without knowing any technical concepts at all? Kind of, but, not really. Nobody could really give me a clear and concise answer. Or even if they did, it was never the same answer. Someone said it's all about human life. The other said it's all about saving money. Someone else said it's about making sure there are processes in place, or not fixing the issue, or not picking the technical answer. I'm like, well, which one is it? Which one is it? Is there no one who can give me a clear answer on this? And at this point, I was like counting down to my exam, and I was desperate to get some sort of edge. And the fact that I didn't know how to think like a manager, which the exam was all about, pretty much had me thinking I'm going to fail this thing. Right? And I know you've been trying your best to get a grip on this how to think like a manager thing too. I can feel it. I can feel your curiosity and puzzlement through this monitor or phone screen or tablet that you're looking through. I can see through this portal as if there was a distortion in space-time and we have just connected through cyberspace. I can feel that. We're always being told the CISSP is a high-level exam in which you have to think like a manager. But what does that mean exactly, to think like a manager? Let's go over it in this video. First, let's talk about why. Why is it important to ask why for the CISSP exam? Why is it important to ask why for the CISSP exam? If you ask why enough times, well, let's answer this. Because asking why is much more important than any of the other questions like how, when, what, and where. If you ask why enough times, you will eventually answer all those other questions anyway. And at the same time, reach the ultimate reason and the ultimate high-level answer. Let me just quickly go through an example of asking why continuously. Here is a simple question you can ask yourself during the course of your CISSP studies. And this is just an example. You can substitute in any other topic. Why do we have SAML tokens? We have SAML tokens to pass authentication information between an identity provider and a service provider, right? SAML token, otherwise known as a SAML assertion. It's XML based, and it just doesn't contain your authentication information, just information about your authentication information from the identity provider, which resides within your organization, going to the service provider. I got a whole bunch of videos on that in the members portal. So continuing on, why do we use SAML tokens? We use SAML tokens to pass authentication information back and forth, okay? Why do we want to use SAML for this type of client to service provider? There's a few reasons, but one of those reasons is single sign-on. Why do we want to use single sign-on? Again, a few reasons, but one of which is that users don't have to manage a lot of usernames and passwords to different online service providers. So far, by asking why, we have answered why we use SAML tokens, and the answers we have come up with are technical answers, right? Authentication stuff, single sign-on, these are technical answers. But let's continue on. Why don't we want to manage company employees having a lot of usernames and passwords? Because users are going to either forget all the passwords, or they're going to misplace some passwords, or they're going to have so many passwords that it may inadvertently create some more security risks. So right here, right now, by asking why, we've reached some high-level answers, some thinking like a manager type answers. By stating that we use SAML tokens for single sign-on, that's a technical answer. By continuing to ask why and really drilling down and going higher and higher in the management echelon, we have reached some how to think like a manager type answers. Sure, managers care about single sign-on, but they don't like single sign-on because of its technological abilities. They like it because of what it does for the money, the potential to reduce administrative overhead and reduce security vulnerabilities. Just by asking why, we've gone from a technical answer to higher level types of thinking. That's how you start to think like a manager. And try this. Ask a software developer why we have SAML tokens, and then ask a manager why we have SAML tokens. And I guarantee you 100%, you will get two completely different answers. Why do you have to think like a manager for the CISSP exam? Because thinking like a manager requires a high-level view of the organization. Let's take a look at another visual example of all the points we have to cover as a manager when studying our CISSP. Thinking like a manager means you have to have a high-level interconnected understanding. What do we mean by interconnected understanding? Now, as I've been grinding every night for the last 2,000 nights of my life as a CISSP instructor, I have found that everything in one CISSP domain relates to everything else in another CISSP domain. Firewalls relate to database security. Database security relates to proper physical security facility design. Facility or physical security design can relate to defense in depth. And defense in depth relates to encryption. It's all interconnected. That's the reason we have 8 domains in the CISSP common body of knowledge. The best thing you can do for yourself when trying to think like a manager is not to think of all those domains as separate, but as a single fluid entity. As in all these 8 domains are just trying to maintain tranquility with all the other domains. One domain relates to another. There is overlap. It's swimming with overlap. The policies, procedures, standards, baselines we establish in Domain 1, Security and Risk Management, are exactly what determines the guiding factors of what happens in Domains 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay? And it is when you understand how all 8 of these domains come together, do you truly understand what it is to think like a manager and pass your CISSP exam. And you'll find that in doing so, whether you pass the CISSP exam or not, you will have become a better security professional. I've been saying that since 2014. My goal, or Prabh's goal, is not to just help you pass the CISSP exam, but to make you a better security professional. 2 things will happen. Look, here's one of the realest things you'll ever hear. 2 things will happen when you take your CISSP exam. Either you'll pass it, or you'll have taken the most expensive and most realistic practice exam question set there is. Whatever the result, you will have become a more knowledgeable security professional than you were a day, a week, or months before that. Okay? Let's take a look at what it means to have a high level and interconnected understanding as a manager. So if we take a look at this diagram here, right in the center of it, it says, what does a manager think about when handling confidential information? And that center text is now surrounded by our 8 domains of the CISSP common body of knowledge. So as a manager, you're in the center of it all. You're in the center, and you have to look at and consider all the eight different vectors of the CISSP domains when dealing with just one topic. That text in the orange box could say anything. What does a manager think about when handling a router? What does a manager think about when implementing 2-factor authentication? For this one, it says, what does a manager think about when handling confidential information? Well, if we were to go in order, starting with domain 1, you're going to need support from senior management to implement a classification program. So for that to happen, you need a classification policy. You need senior management to give you permission to spend the amount of money and use the amount of resources to start a classification program. So a classification policy would come first. And really, anything in the CISSP, a policy has to come first before anyone does anything. I don't know if I said this already, but I think at the beginning of the video, I said everything that happens in domain 1, the policies, procedures, baseline, standards, all that determines everything else that goes on in the rest of the domains. So with domain 1, a manager gets his or her policy, their permission from senior management. Moving on to domain 2, asset security. Now what do we do with this information? Now you're thinking like a manager. Not a systems administrator, not a network security engineer. You're thinking like a manager. So to secure this asset as a manager, you're going to classify it. If you're thinking like a technical person, you might say, oh, to secure this asset, this confidential information, we need to encrypt it. Yeah, that's right, but that's in domain 4, or domain 3, right? Or domain 4 with a firewall if you're using IPsec or VPNs. That comes later. So as a manager dealing with the concept of asset security, you're going to want to classify this information first so people know how to handle it, right? You're not going to handle confidential information the same way you're going to handle information that's public. There are two different complexities to them. So with domain 2, you're going to assign it a classification level of confidential if you're working in an organization. If you're in the military or in a government agency, it would probably be something like top secret. Okay, then you shift to domain 3. Remember, you're looking at this as a manager, not as a technical person. You're shifting to domain 3, and then you have to choose the encryption type. As a manager, you can't just say, okay, use AES 256. That's the strongest thing we have. Make sure everyone uses AES 256. That actually probably is the best course of action, but as a manager, you have to consider, is AES going to take up too many resources? Do we have the ability to implement AES 256? Why can't we use triple DES? Why can't we use some other symmetric encryption algorithm? So this is why you have to know domain 3 and cryptography. So as a manager, if you know about it, you know which method to best implement. Now, you can't just pick one. You have to know about it. And I'll go over, people ask me, it's not a technical exam. Do I have to know a lot of network security? You don't have to know it like that, but yeah, you do have to know about it. Because what you understand from domain 4, network security, is what's going to help you as a manager to make the best decisions that you can. Like domain 4, A manager is gonna want to implement a firewall, depending on where this information is. If it's on a server, and if it's on the network, you're going to want a firewall to protect that server on the network. So halfway through the domains, we looked at domain 1. A manager has to consider the policy from domain 1, the classification level for domain 2, an encryption type in domain 3, a perimeter protection, a technical perimeter protection like a firewall. And if this data just happens to be in the cloud or somewhere else, manager has to consider the cloud identity management system. Has to think about what kind of cloud it's in. Is it in a public cloud? Is it in a private cloud? Is it being hosted in a software as a service or a platform as a service? Or is there a database in the cloud itself and only people internal to the organization has to be part of a federated identity management using single sign, all of that. Domain 6, the data, the confidential information. Is it on a server that's high risk, or should there be vulnerability assessments on it? Should we always have an annual or quarterly vulnerability assessment to make sure no new vulnerabilities have come up? The answer to that is yes. For the CISSP exam, you're never just done with one vulnerability assessment or risk assessment or business impact assessment or analysis. It's never just a one-time thing. As our security environment becomes more complex, introduces more risk, so we have to keep up with our assessments. Everything's always changing, right? I mean, even the CISSP exam is changing. It changes in May 2021. This is because it is keeping up with the changes in the security industry. You can't avoid it. It's just how it's going to happen. And in lieu of vulnerability assessment, a manager always has to think about what happens if there's an incident on the data. If there's a breach, how will the company respond to it? How can the company put in processes in place, incident steps in place, so it can deal and contain it as fast as possible? What is their incident response plan? That's why, sometimes you hear about how do you think like a manager? Well, a lot of people say, well, you don't want to unplug the server when there's an incident. You want to contact the manager. And this is why. A manager will say, hey, forget about the confidential information for a second. Just say that a server has data on it, and a server has shown to have virus on it, a very low impact virus. A manager might not say, oh, unplug that from a network immediately. The manager might say that, hey, let the server run because it's generating money for us now, and it's a low risk virus. Let's wait till after business hours to pull the plug. But if it's like a worm, which propagates throughout the network, then a manager might say, yeah, disconnect that web server immediately. We'll take the loss from disconnecting from the network, which might be less than the loss of if that worm propagated throughout the network and took over other servers. Okay? So you're about to do a 360-degree turn. So as a manager, you have to look at all directions. It's like a battlefield. You got to look at all different aspects of it, including domain 8. A manager may never be a developer. He or she may never be a network engineer, but they have to consider all 8 domains. And you, as a person who is studying for the CISSP exam, this is why you're studying it. You're not studying it to pass an exam. You're studying to understand all these areas of security so you can better serve your employer. Or if you own your own business, which you might one day as a CISSP, you can set a direction. You might be senior management one day. And armed with the knowledge that the CISSP exam has given you, you will be able to make better decisions. So with domain 8, the data might be on a database. You want to know what kind of database security is on that server or on that database. What kind of access control is on that database? Was the database created with a good software development lifecycle plan? That kind of stuff. Remember, you can put anything in that square box. But as a manager, you have to think about all 8 domains. Okay? That's a high-level view of why you have to think like a manager in order to successfully answer the questions on the CISSP exam, a security exam, a business exam, an exam that tests not just your understanding of keeping a business running, but also an understanding of the security industry's lexicon. Okay? So we've answered why it is important to think like a manager, and we've answered why it is important to keep asking why. Let's now take a look at some primary concepts of thinking like a manager. As in, let's take a look at the concepts that will align your thought process with that of an information security manager. Is everybody awake? It's probably a long video already. I think it's like 30 minutes already. This is the good part. All right. If you learn nothing, then just focus on this folder of primary concepts. Let's take a really quick look of the primary concepts, because a lot of people ask me, what do we need to memorize for the CISSP exam, or what do we need to write down on that piece of paper during the exam? Back when I took the exam, I pretty much wrote down things like OSI model layers, or port numbers, or the different symmetric encryption types, or those annoying little DES mode things to remember. You know, one of the DES modes used 56 bits, usable 56 bits blocks that's usable, but it has 64 bits total. Everybody asked me if we need to remember that. And even I was like, you know what, I should really remember this. It seems like something I should know. No. Things like cipher block chaining, initialization vectors, you know, that's good to know, but do you really need to specifically memorize that? No. You need to understand that, because writing that down on that piece of paper, none of that really mattered. What I should have written down were the following we're about to go over. There is a simple reason we protect the lives of humans, and the famous astronomer Carl Sagan said it best. Out of 100 billion galaxies, you will not find another. You will not find another human being stretched from one end of this galaxy 100,000 light years to the other side. The billions of years of complex evolution that took place for us humans to be here are at an astronomical odds to occur anywhere else. You're not going to find another one of us. Protect and save your fellow human beings at all costs, please. And we'll go more into human safety right after this. All these domains, domain 1 through 8, access policies, security management, even software development, they are at a core to help save human life. Then the business, but always human life first. Second is behaving ethically. You may be faced with decisions in your security career where ethics will play a strong role. It is at this point where you have to decide whether to follow your ethics or that of the organization. It's not an easy choice. Nothing in security is always an easy choice. And remember, the CISSP Code of Ethics is very testable in the exam. The ISC² wants you to know those Code of Ethics for the exam and as a CISSP in real life. As a security professional and as a manager, your knowledge will only increase if you know the Code of Ethics and how to apply them. I'll just say what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has said before. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Behave justly. Behave the way you know deep down inside is the right way. And then if you have doubts, refer to the ISC² Code of Ethics. Right? Remember, they are testable. It just doesn't apply to being a security manager, but security professionals from all realms. Third is business continuity. Do not let the business fail. Have a BCP DRP plan in place. This means, as stated earlier, if there is a virus on a server, unplugging it isn't going to save the business. What's going to save the business is having a proper incident response plan. That's what's going to save it. And for the BCP DRP planning phases, step 1, 2, 3, 4, I think the first one is initiation, business impact analysis, recovery strategies, and then implementation. Out of all those steps, if you don't know about BCP DRP, that's bad. But if you specifically don't know about the business impact analysis phase of BCP DRP, you will fail the exam. You will fail the exam like the business will have failed if you don't know about business recovery and business continuity and disaster recovery. Okay? Know your BCP DRP for the CISSP exam. Next is to maximize corporate profits. Guys, do not get it twisted. Next to human life, the next most important thing for a business is to make money. Maximize your corporate profits. Help your company make money. Even if you're a chief information security officer and you think your whole focus is just the security of the business, no. Your whole job is to make sure everything stays secure so there's no incidents to take care of and waste money on. Right? You're trying to prevent incidents from happening, which will cost money. No business, no security. No security, we don't have a job. So make sure the business makes money. Which also means implement policies, procedures, and other processes to save money, to make money, and not to waste money. Okay? Number 5 is to understand to avoid or minimize threats. You have to understand the management decisions in your CISSP study guide, such as accepting, avoiding, rejecting, or transferring risk. This also goes in line with BCP DRP and knowing things like a cold site, a warm site, a hot site, and when to use each one. That's the thing with the CISSP exam. You can't just know a topic and memorize it and say, okay, I memorized the definition, that's it. No, you have to know when to use them and when it's not appropriate to use them. If your company has a very small budget, you're not going to get a hot site. That's like the most expensive business disaster recovery plan there is. You're going to maybe negotiate a cold site or a warm site. Things like that. Number 6 is all controls must be cost justified. Don't spend more money than you have to. And don't spend too little money on a valuable asset. Like, don't spend $15 on a shelf from eBay so you can put your Rolex watch on it. You want a shelf that's going to last and is going to give you the confidence that your expensive watch isn't going to fall to the floor and break. Or a CISSP example is, don't spend too much on a countermeasure that costs more than the asset. Don't spend $5,000 on a firewall to protect an asset that is valued at $1,000. Right? Logical stuff. Number 7 is senior management must drive the security program. It's a top to bottom approach. Everything comes from the top. Your coworker doesn't get to tell you to start an information security program, or your supervisor doesn't just get to tell you to start a project. There must be a reason, and that reason comes from senior management. That is part of thinking like a manager. And even then, even your manager doesn't get to tell you to do something or start a new project unless it's been signed off by management or told to your manager by management. Your manager just can't say, hey, make sure you have a clean desk policy. And if you ask why, they don't get to say, because I said so. No, that's not a good manager. A good manager will say that we are implementing clean desk policies per senior management because we are preparing for our upcoming ISO 27001 certification. That's a great reason to have a clean desk policy. Okay. Number 8 is a security professional has no decision-making authority unless assigned by management. When taking the CISSP exam, act like you are a hired consultant in the company. You don't want to touch anything. Pretend you got hired and you then turned on your Zoom conference meeting and you're attending a meeting with an organization's security management team and their security team to go over their assets and recovery strategies. Then over Zoom, you're not at the company site, right? You're over Zoom now. You're looking, you're screen sharing or you have your camera on. You just advise them. You physically don't get to touch anything. Which, I said this on Prabh's webinar. That's actually a pretty good idea for the real exam. When you're taking the CISSP exam, right? Pretend you are a security consultant in a Zoom meeting only. You are not at the company site and you can't touch anything. You can just advise over Zoom. That's it. Yeah, actually do that now that I think about it. That's a solid way of looking at it. When you're in the testing center for your CISSP exam, looking at the computer monitor of questions, just pretend you are being asked these questions by an actual organization and respond that way. Don't touch, Just advise. And the last one is use automated tools where appropriate. Some things a machine can just do better and faster than humans, and this gets more and more true as the years progress along. A manager will use automated tools so they don't tie up a systems administrator to add accounts manually or have a security team manually scan devices for vulnerabilities, because a vulnerability scanner can do a much better and faster job because it was created and built for that purpose. Okay? It's like those password resets in your company. If every time a user forgot their password, it's best to just have a self reset function within your organization instead of having to call the systems of the IT administrator every single time. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time and money, really. That's thinking like a manager. All right, these are my top 9 recommended ways to think like a manager. Let's check out this folder on safety real quick, shall we? I'm kind of losing my place here because I guess I didn't write this section in my script that I'm following here. I don't have a section for safety here. I guess when I did Prabh's webinar, I didn't. I kind of did this. You know what? Forget the script. I'll just do this off the cuff. During this pandemic, I'm too scared to even touch a doorknob, much less go into the office or travel anywhere. But human safety is especially true these days. Before the pandemic, I really wanted to get this like full sleeve tattoo right on my right or left arm. I couldn't figure out which, or maybe both. Sometime around March or April, right as the quarantine started. Just as the quarantine hit. Now I don't even know when that's even going to happen. I mean, I guess after the vaccine, I'll probably be able to get that. And yeah, I know. These are first world problems, but I'm at a position in my life where I don't have to answer to anyone. So it's the best time for me to get a tattoo without worrying about what it's going to do to my career or whatever. I bet Joe Barnes and I are going to be the only CISSP instructors in this world with full sleeve tattoos. Joe Barnes is a CISSP instructor with training camp. Consider yourself lucky if you happen to get him as your instructor. You're as good as gold. Joe will show you the way. He's a good guy. Straight shooter. All right, well, what's first here? Work safety. Okay, human safety. The number one priority always in the CISSP exam and everything in real life is human safety. Several things within your organization may drive the preservation of saving human life without you even knowing it, but it's doing it in the background. All those signs that say safety first or wear hard hats in construction sites or following safety regulations, those hazard signs, health monitors, or even health insurance, these are all here to keep the human heart beating. That comes above everything else. It's good and key to think that a sound BCP DRP program in an organization and within the pages of our CISSP books is for making sure of the availability of our most critical systems, right? And for the proper recovery and restoration of an organization after a disaster. But the real reason is to make sure that during a serious or even a non-serious disaster, that there are properly tested procedures and processes in place to make sure people can survive the disaster. That's really it. Same with our physical environment security controls. Things like CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, or facility security, and just general awareness of what's going on around you. It's all about safety first. You gotta keep that in mind. And then within the enterprise, things like system resilience, and I don't mean like servers or something, that kind of systems. I mean like systems like electricity, the HVAC systems, water suppression systems, and in some cases even the oxygen levels, like in a laboratory or something. That's the system resilience I'm talking about. And intrusion detection, again, we mean physical intrusion detection systems, things like electromechanical or volumetric, heat sensors, wave patterns, disturbances in light or pressure mats, man traps, piggybacking, tailgating. What else? Those emergency fire doors that fail safe or fail open in case there's a fire, right? In case of a fire, you want those doors to open. You don't want them to automatically lock. That's all about human life. Having the right power supply in case of blackouts or brownouts and the right candle power needed for visibility in dark areas, it's to make sure that people don't die, all right? Don't let people die. That's your number one job as a CISSP. Don't let people die. Otherwise, not only are you going to go to prison, but worse, that's going to be on your conscience for the rest of your life. And that's almost as bad as going to jail sometimes. You know what I'm saying? Do your thing. Don't let someone's son, daughter, mother, father die on your watch. All right? Hey, let's get out of this grim slide. Let's take a look at happier things like money. Everybody loves money, right? Yeah, you do. Don't deny it. I love money. I love earning it. I love spending it. And I especially love it when I hear my homies are making it with me. But we're going to talk about money as it relates to the CISSP in the form of cost and value. An asset is a straight fixed cost. Purchasing a $5,000 firewall is a cost. The fact that the same firewall protects multiple web servers, which if compromised would cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's the value. Value and cost are two different things. I don't think the CISSP study guys go into value and cost. Maybe the Sean Harris does, but it's important to know the difference. Let's take a look at an example using GDPR. Okay? GDPR, what does it mean to be GDPR ready? GDPR ready means to know the GDPR, the principles of it, the workings of it, the articles, and the roles and responsibilities. And I'm talking about GDPR ready for you, for the CISSP exam, not a company. But when I say, in this slide, when it says the cost of GDPR compliance, I'm talking about what it would cost your company to be GDPR ready. You know, and as a CISSP, they're going to look at you and say, hey, we need to be GDPR ready. Well, I mean, frankly, you should already be that because it's already here. But if they look to you to say they need to be GDPR compliant, you need to know what that entails. So take, for example, the cost of getting your organization ready for GDPR. It costs your company $10,000. Okay? That's a lot of money. $10,000. When we talk about the potential revenue lost from non-compliance, think about it. If you don't spend that $10,000 to get your company ready for GDPR, your potential customer or clients might not want to do business with a non-GDPR compliant company, even if it's a USA-based company with European Union citizens. Right? That's what the GDPR is. It's a way for European Union citizens to have more control over their data, and there's a lot more regulations with what companies can do with that data. Even if you're a company in the United States, if you handle EU customers, you know, if you do international business, which is like a lot of businesses, your company needs to be GDPR ready, or any customers from Europe, if they find out that you're not doing all you can to protect their private data per the GDPR, you could lose up to $100,000 just for not spending $10,000. So the cost of not being GDPR ready may save you $10,000, but in the end, you may lose $100,000. Right? And if there happens to be a breach within your organization, and it looks like if you're not GDPR compliant, and if you do have EU citizen data, the fine can be in the hundreds of millions. The slide says $1 million. That's actually on the cheap end. I think some company just got slapped with like a $250 million fine for GDPR. I could be reading that wrong. It either says 250 million or 25 million. I can't tell which one. So as far as value and cost, a manager has to think about that. Do you want to save $10,000 by not being GDPR compliant with a potential of losing $100,000 in revenue with an even greater potential of being fined $1 million? So by trying to save $10,000, you've just lost $1 million and $100,000. Now, if you paid that $10,000, you would have gained $100,000 and would have to pay the $1 million fine, right? The cost is $10,000, but the value of that reaches above $1 million. That's value and cost. Just want to touch on that real quick. Let's check out some other important points about thinking like a manager, and that's the processes, roles, and responsibilities for the CISSP exam. Very important. Oh, why did I not bother to write a script for this part? I'm going to have to do this completely from my mind, and I feel like I'm going to miss out telling you guys something. If that happens, I'll make sure to put in captions and stuff in the final edits. Thinking like a manager means to know the processes that you study in your CISSP books. Okay, that's a solid definition. You just have to know the processes that's in the books. But not a lot of people might put an emphasis on the fact that you also have to know the roles involved in those processes. Otherwise, how are you going to know who's going to do what? And you have to know the responsibilities of those roles in those processes. Let's take a few important examples, and we'll just run right through this thing. What are some important processes for the CISSP? Ones that come to mind are, of course, the software development lifecycle. You gotta know that. There's an entire domain dedicated to that. Everyone always asks me, what are the proper steps to the software development lifecycle? Or what are what they ask me is, what are the official steps that we have to know for the CISSP exam? The answer is, there are no official steps. There are no official steps to anything in the CISSP. The best way to understand what steps are involved in the software development lifecycle is to do this. Here's a nice little tactic. You read about the steps in the Cybex book. You read about the steps in the Sean Harris book. And then you read about the steps in, say, the NIST document. Then you take all three documents, and I feel like I've already said this in this video beforehand. Did I already say that? See, I should have written a script for this. So in case I didn't say it before, I'll say it again. You take what each the two books and some other source says about the steps of the SDLC, and then you just go through the general step. If you look at all three documents, you'll see that the first step is initiation, bar none. All three sources agree that the first step of the software development lifecycle is initiation. Okay, so in your mind, you know that initiation is the first step of the software development lifecycle. You can do this with any of the processes in the CISSP study guides. What's another important process? BCP DRP. You gotta know BCP DRP. And I know I said this at the beginning of the video. If you don't know BCP DRP, you will fail the CISSP exam. It's as simple as that. What's another good process? Incident response. How you respond to an incident. Most of the CISSPs I help around the world are responding to incidents in some capacity, right? They always say, "Hey, I'm a network engineer. I'm a CCIE. I don't really know a lot of high-level stuff. My job is security. I work on the firewall or the router, or I'm a BGP engineer, and I usually respond to something. I react to something. I'm not a manager who creates policies for others to do. I'm more reactive than proactive." So that's incident response. There are steps to incident response, and you do the same thing. You look at your Cybex book, you look at your Sean Harris book, and I believe there is a NIST document for specifically for just incident response. It may be for just malware handling, but you'd get the general idea. So I highly recommend looking at those NIST document for, I think it's called incident handling for malware response, or malware response incident handling, something like that. PKI, Public Key Infrastructure, Certificate Authority, Registration Authority, Client, Server, Digital Certificates. You gotta know this process. For the CISSP exam, it helps greatly to reinforce your knowledge of cryptography if you know public key infrastructure, because it involves almost all the elements. Things like digital certificates, transport layer security, 802.1x, what's that called? EAP, Extensible Authentication Protocol. All that derives from public key infrastructure, certificates. Important to know that process. You know, not only for the exam, but in real life. If your manager at work asks you to ask your opinion on how we can get a public key infrastructure for the office, what are you gonna say? Right? You got to know that. At least know what a public and private key pair is and what happens when you encrypt with a public key versus signing with a private key. Right? What services do they provide? You know, they provide confidentiality, integrity, authentication, non-repudiation. Just know those high-level concepts. Cloud vendor is not exactly a process, but there is a process to obtain a cloud vendor. Right? Before your company engages with Azure or AWS and decides to get like a virtual firewall, virtual server, or user storage for data, you want to research that cloud vendor. I think this is just specifically for the CISSP exam. I don't think in real life anybody even does this, but for the CISSP exam, before choosing not just a cloud vendor, think of a cloud vendor as a third party. Before engaging a third party, make sure to do your due diligence in the form of a risk assessment. Check out that third party. Make sure they're doing business well. Are they following, do their systems follow common criteria? Do they have assurance levels? Do they have, are they following the steps of the capability maturity integration model, CMMI? Do your research before engaging a third party, because whoever you're doing business with, their risk becomes your risks. Okay, especially with cloud vendors, because you don't know what's going on in their infrastructure. They don't give you complete visibility. You only own what you own. If you engage a software as a service, you just get access to the software. You don't know how they're securing all that. In real life, odds are Amazon or Microsoft is doing a superb job securing their infrastructure, better than we can even dream of. But as far as the CISSP exam is concerned, you got to do your due diligence. You got to trust but verify. And then there is, what's the next one? Data handling. There is a process to data handling in your CISSP study guides. Marking, labeling, classification, meta tags. If someone hands you some confidential data, or any data really, you got to know what to do with that starting from the beginning. For one thing, data, you don't hand, maybe you as a security professional gets handed data, but when you need that data to be given to senior management for analysis, that's when the data becomes information. Information is useful. Data is not. So you have to know how to handle that, how to transform that data into information. The other process is an information security program itself. Now we're veering away from being a technical person to taking more of a role of a chief information security officer, a CISO. If you're a CISO of a company, maybe after getting the CIS, you will become one down the line. They're going to say, hey, you're now the new CISO. We just had a breach last year. We want to make sure that doesn't happen again, or at least reduce the effects of it. What are you going to do to start an information security program? You have to kind of know that process. The processes I picked in this slide, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 processes, they are not the most critical. These are just random processes that I picked, except for software development lifecycle and BCP DRP. Those are important. And incident response. At least know the top 3. That's why I put those as the top 3. Okay, so those are some processes. You studied them, you know about them, you know the steps, you're familiar with them, and you think you can brush it off and be like, I'm ready for the CISSP exam. You got to know the roles contained within them, as well as the role's responsibility. So for software development lifecycle, when I think of SDLC, or where someone may think of SDLC, you may think, oh, software development, one of the roles is a software developer, a database engineer, or anything like that. What I think is management. And their responsibility is approval, funding, and addressing security concerns. It's not that you have to know just the processes of software development lifecycle, but this is a security exam, so you have to know where in the process you're going to put security. For me, security, well, not for me, this is for the CISSP exam, you always got to start with security at the beginning. So for the role of management, as far as the software development lifecycle, they get involved in the very first step, initiation. That's the first step they're going to be in, and probably the only step. This is your only chance to interface with management and ask them, hey, I know you're approving this, you're approving the funding, you're giving us the money, you're allocating the resources, but as a CISSP, I must also ask you that, hey, you must look at these security concerns with this new software that you're going to develop, with this new system that you're going to buy. Okay, so management's role in the software development lifecycle is to approve the actual SDLC, is to provide funding, and to address any security concerns. And all you're looking for them as a security concern approval is just to say, yeah, listen to the CISSP. We've heard he gave us some interesting points about what the security concerns are, and we would like them to be addressed moving forward. So if they've given you approval to address security moving forward, right? Because nobody wants to address security unless they have to. You as a CISSP have to push for that. The next one for the BCP DRP, one of my most important roles for that is departmental leaders, the business functional leaders, the VP of sales, the VP of marketing, the head developer, the IT director. All these higher level roles are needed for their input during the business impact analysis. That's the most important part. We can test the BCP DRP, we can come up with recovery strategies, but all that doesn't matter if we don't know from the departmental leaders during the business impact analysis what the most critical assets are. They are the ones during the BIA that tell us that, hey, this server, it cannot go down for even a second, for even a minute. If this server goes down for a minute, we're going to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay, they're the ones who tell us that because they know what's the most important thing in the department, because they're responsible for it and they don't want anything to go wrong with it. So that's where they act during the business impact analysis to let the BCP team know that, hey, put in recovery strategies to make sure this is made available during a disaster. Otherwise, this company is going to be obliterated. Okay, important role during the BCP DRP is departmental leaders who provide input during the BIA. And during incident response, just have a manager around. As stated before, if there's an incident, you as a network engineer, as a technical person, don't get to make any decisions. You don't get to decide to unplug that server. You don't get to decide to reboot that firewall. You don't get to decide any of that. You need to find a manager who's responsible for making that decision and coming to the conclusion of the decision-making process. All right, I think earlier we talked about, if the virus on a server is low impact, there's no point in unplugging the web server. You're going to lose too much money for what it's worth. You want to wait until something more serious happens. Okay? Incident response, don't make any decisions. Wait for your manager who's going to take up the role of the decision-making process. For PKI, an important role is the certificate authority. The certificate authority is the trusted third party, like in extensible authentication protocol that uses certificates, right? Client and server. If I forget if EAP requires both client and server. EAP TLS, I think only the server needs the certificate, while EAP TTLS, both the client and server need to authenticate themselves. Either way, in order for the client to trust the server or the server to trust the client, they're just not going to trust each other. they need someone in the middle to vouch for both of them at the same time, which is the certificate authority, the CA. They provide the trust. Okay? The certificate authority is an important role in public key infrastructure with the responsibility of providing trust. This is why it's important to know the process, the roles involved, and their responsibilities. And with the cloud vendor, it is a role of the cloud service provider to give you the service that you're looking for. And to make sure that they are giving you the service you're looking for, you need to have service level agreements or non-disclosure agreements prepared before engaging them. Because you're trusting them with the security of your infrastructure. With the security, well, it's really their infrastructure, but you're renting it and you're the one who's paying for it. So you want to make sure everything's right. You want to make sure that CSP is giving all the tenants, like you, the proper security of the infrastructure to meet your business requirements, to meet your level of risk acceptance. Okay. Another role in cloud vendor could be the tenant, or, well, that's it really, right? And when it comes to the cloud, all I can think about is the cloud service provider or the tenant. I don't know, maybe if you're watching a CCSP video, cloud certified security professional video, they can go into more detail. Or, check out Prashant Mohan's new document, free PDF document called CIRRUS that talks all about CCSP. He'll tell you everything you need to know. As far as data handling, come on, these are terms you already know. Data owner, data custodian. What's the data owner responsible for? What's the number one thing the data owner is responsible for? Data classification. They're the one who gets data in and says that's confidential, that's top secret, or that's private, that's sensitive, or that's sensitive but unclassified, whatever that means. I don't know what that means. I've never seen sensitive but unclassified in real life. I think that's in the Cybex. I have no idea what they mean by that. So data handling, remember, next to human life, money and data are probably the next most important thing. So you have to know how to handle that. And one of the roles of that is data owner. So know your data owner, data custodian. That's all I can think of. And for the information security program, who did we say is the most important role? The CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. And why are they an important role? Because they are the driving factor. Remember in the last slide of those 9 points, I said something like the senior management has to drive priorities. They have to drive the security program. They have to drive the business initiatives. For the information security program, the CISO is the driving factor. It all starts with him. Now, the CISO might get orders from the CEO, but it's not the CEO's job to be the driving factor of the information security program. That's the CISO. The CEO might be ultimately responsible if that fails, but the CEO is going to blame the CISO just in case. He's going to do that, or she's going to do that. No one wants to take responsibility when security goes down. That's why they get the CISO. I mean, the whole point of a CISO was to take the blame. I remember when Target had their breach, they didn't have a CISO. I think the CEO took the brunt of the blame for that one. And immediately later, they created a CISO position. Just so when things hit the fan again, they can blame the CISO just in case everything went wrong. Hey, don't blame me. The CISO is in charge of the information security program. He or she is the driving factor. Okay? So in your company, if they suddenly enthusiastically come to you as the new CISSP and they offer you the CISO position, be careful what you're getting into. You better know your stuff, and you better know what happens if something goes wrong. Okay, I think I spent way too much time on processes, roles, and responsibilities. Let's move on to something else, and a burning question that everybody always has, and that's, how much technical knowledge do I need to have for the CISSP exam? Do I need to be technical? Do I need to be technical for the CISSP exam? I get asked this question so much, always with a tinge of fear, or almost with a little bit of hope that I'll say, "Oh, not that much." And guess what? Yeah, you don't need to be a CCIE for the. You don't even need to be a CCNA for the CISSP exam, but it really helps. Domain 4 has the most pages in any CISSP book. I guarantee you that. Sean Harris, it's the thickest chapter. Cybex, it's the thickest chapter. And the truth about Domain 4 network security is, if you don't work in network security in real life, it's not going to come easy to you. It's just not. But there are ways to counter that. So take a look at this picture. If you can answer some of these questions, if you can get a good grasp of what I'm asking, you should be okay. So one of the first things I just want to simply ask is, do you understand this network architecture? Do you understand what happens at the internet? Why there's a router that close to internet? Why there's a firewall after the router? Why there's a switch? The difference between fiber optic cable or unshielded twisted pair? Why there's another switch? Why there's 5 different servers? Why there is a hub in between the printers? Why there is that weird looking device with 2 antennas giving off wireless signals to those other 3 wireless clients? Do you know what's going on here? If someone were to ask you, draw me a network diagram, would you draw something like this? Or just someone were to ask you, like, how if I give you a server, how would we connect to the internet? What devices would we need? You'd need a router. You don't need one, but it's highly advised that you get a firewall. The firewall is probably the strongest network security device you can have in your organization. Basically, look at these servers. This is why you need to know your cryptography. Do you know how to use symmetric or asymmetric encryption to secure those servers? Are you going to encrypt the data on those drives with AES, or are you going to encrypt it with non-repudiation? That was a trick question. You don't encrypt anything with non-repudiation. If you know your cryptography, you would have caught that. So that's why we learn cryptography. So we know how to encrypt the mail server. We know how to encrypt the web, FTP, proxy, DNS server. Why are we using an FTP server? That's not secure. We'd rather use FTPS. Why are we using that web server? It's probably internet facing. Is it using TLS, transport layer security? Are all these servers using transport layer security if they're being connected to from the web? Now that's why you have to know that. That's why you have to know encryption, symmetric encryption algorithms, and why they're strong, and when to use which one, or what encryption complements another hashing algorithm. Right? Encryption and hashing are 2 different things. You have to use them in combination, because encryption provides confidentiality, and hashing provides integrity. You got to have both. Right, then if I were to ask you, where would you put an IDS, intrusion detection system, or intrusion prevention system? Do you know where to put that on the network? Do you know why you'd put that on the network? Do you know how an IPS differs from an IDS in case of a incoming threat? Say a malicious virus signature, a malicious signature just comes into your network. How would an IPS react versus an IDS? Right, you need to know that. Just FYI, an intrusion prevention system would try to block it immediately in real time. And an intrusion detection system would just probably send an alert to the administrator that, hey, this is happening, you need to do something. Whereas IPS would take the responsibility on themselves. Do you know what IPsec is? IP security. Do you know why it's handled on the firewall? IPsec is probably a big part of being the CISSP. It secures data in motion. It's probably the strongest thing there is to secure data in motion. Right? That's, again, it's part of Domain 4. Big part of Domain 4, actually. Internet Protocol Security. Do you know what federated identity management is? Cloud stuff. Single sign-on, SAML, identity provider, OAuth, all those cloud terms. Do you know how that fits into the entire network here? That's why you study those cloud terms, cloud computing terms, public cloud, private cloud, just everything in a federated identity management system. How does a single sign-on to the mail server work? How would federated identity help doing single sign-on to those wireless clients? That kind of stuff. You have to know that. Do you know what 802.1x is? If you at least don't know the details of 802.1x, at least do you know that it's on layer 2? It's a layer 2 technology. It's not a layer 3. It works at the data link layer. Do you know how to secure those remote clients, getting RDP, remote access security? That kind of goes hand in hand with IPsec. IPsec is like site-to-site VPNs, while RDP, remote access security, is like using transport layer security, SSL or TLS. You want to use TLS because SSL is obsolete due to the Poodle attack. You know, Kerberos. Everyone wants to know about Kerberos. And everyone thinks that memorizing the fact that it's a 3-headed dog or uses what port numbers and they're good for the exam. No. You have to know. I'm putting that word Kerberos there underneath over the printer. What can you tell me about that? Looking at this video, if I were to ask you, explain how that printer would use Kerberos, you should be able to explain it to me that they use ticket granting server issues tickets to a client using ticket granting tickets and session keys and all the passwords for all the clients and the authentication mechanisms are stored on the KDP, and the KDP is a single point of failure, and they issue all these tickets that allow the client to access the printer through the use of the trust of the KDP. You should know all that. That's why we study all that. That's part of knowing domain 4, network security. That's part of knowing all that. Do you have to be technical? No, you don't have to be technical, but you kind of have to have a high-level view of something like this in the diagram. This is just one of thousands of different scenarios that there could be for network security. Do you know anything about WEP or WPA2, wireless technologies? If nothing, at least know never to use WEP because the passwords can be seen in clear text, and to use a stronger one like WPA2. Do you know how they secure wireless signals across the wire, I guess, across the air? You got to know that. VLANs. Do you know the advantages of VLANs? What is a VLAN? And knowing the fact that a VLAN stands for virtual local area network is not enough. You have to know things like broadcast domain or what's the other one? Collision domain. You have to know the differences between that. You have to know about what's that called? CSMA and CS, the collision detection and collision avoidance. Read up on that. That'll help you to understand VLANs. If nothing, at least know if a protocol uses TCP or UDP. Or what are the advantages of TCP versus UDP? Do you know about the three-way handshake? Look, you're not going to be tested on the CISSP exam that what is the second step of the three-way TCP handshake. You're not going to have to say, oh, that's SYNAC. Yeah. You have to know why TCP would work over UDP and for what reason. Which one's better for security? Which one doesn't need security but has a accompanying security protocol? Like DNS. DNS uses UDP port 53, but it uses TCP for zone transfers. Just differences like that, which is really difficult to know if you don't work in the sector. I know it's hard. I work in network security, and it's hard for me. It's just too much information. It's too much. Do you know the OSI model? I'll tell you a secret. If you really get to know the OSI model, everything else in this diagram will make sense. Everything. The internet, the web servers, the firewall, TCP UDP, 802.1x, Kerberos, all of those fall into one of the layers of the OSI model. If you know the OSI model, I don't want to say you're set, but it'll give you a base to better understand the network security domain. So do you have to be technical for the CISSP exam? After what I've said, you decide. It's not that you're going to get technical questions on the exam. It's that there's going to be technical terminology probably used that you're going to need to know in order to just understand the question or the choices. That's how it works. Same with security in real life. People are going to be using all sorts of technical information. You better be on point and be ready to answer that. And not be like, oh, I don't know what that means. I never studied it because I'm a network security engineer. Yeah, well, you're a project manager who's handling network security engineers, so you got to keep up with how they talk. Okay? Do you need to be technical? You tell me. All right, I guess now we'll talk about the book. This whole video, this whole webinar for Prabh was to kind of talk about Think Like a Manager, but not specifically about the book. We're not trying to just make this a whole promotional type of deal. But I will talk about it. Most importantly, the most important thing I want to ask you right now is, do you guys like that cover? I love that cover. I love that cover because my wife came up with it. She saw that. I always talk about VPNs at home. I talk about encryption. I talk about decryption. I talk about why a customer's phase 2 VPN tunnel wasn't coming up, and then first thing tomorrow morning, we're going to run some Ike debugs on it and figure it out. It's most likely a encryption domain problem. I tell her all this stuff, and she doesn't know all this, but she likes the fact that I'm enjoying my job and that I like it. That's why she's so great. I love her for that. She listens to all my BS. She listens to all my technical stuff with a smile, and she knows that, since I'm enjoying it, she's happy that I'm happy. So she says, why don't you do something with all that unlocking you're talking about? And by unlocking, she meant decryption. So that's why the symbol is a big lock with little bits of symbols like flying away, and I'm the book is supposed to be me unlocking your brain to think like a manager or something like that. It's got the little icons are like USBs and a key and all sorts of IT related stuff. I thought it was neat. This whole book thing, it's been an amazing journey. I thought just a few people would buy it, but it seems to be a lot of people. Seems to like it. Okay, so this is how the book is laid out. There's a page that has a practice CISSP related question, just like, any other practice question book. It's set up just like any other practice questions you take. A question and 4 choices. Right underneath the question is the suggested mentality and strategy that should be running through your mind at this time. What this part is doing is making you understand that don't just rush into answering the question right away. Try to hyper-analyze every single choice. All the choices may seem like the right answer, but you have to choose the best answer. You will always hear me say that it is not only important to find the right answer, but it is more important to know why the other choices are wrong. The book emphasizes that no stone should be unturned when it comes to answering CISSP practice questions. Because the more work you put in while you're studying, the faster, the better, and more confidently you will be able to handle the real exam questions. The better you'll be prepared to take them on because you went through this arduous process of hyper-analysis beforehand. Everyone tells you how to take the CISSP exam, but nobody tells you how to think during the course of the exam. Like the actual thinking, like how your brain should operate. The questions in the book are here to help you establish the patience, discipline, and stamina to build the endurance required to sit through the CISSP CAT exam. This particular question asks, expenses, extra responsibilities, and reduced profits are a result of what? And the choices are security, efficiency, convenience, and operability. Classic think like a manager type questions. And in the exam strategy section, information is provided about each of the choices, arguing whether it could or could not be the answer. Within these pages of questions and answers, you will find quick notes, graphics, both of which identify when to think like a manager and what to think given the situation. Now in the explanation section, if you're holding the paperback, it's laid out like on the left side it's the question, and the right side of the book is the answer and explanation. It took like 2 weeks to work with the publisher to get that idea across. Man, writing a book is not easy. I mean, you got to work with the publisher and just kind of get your ideas across with them. They have one set of ideas. Most publishers didn't even know what the CISSP was or what kind of book this is. They're like, what kind of a book is this? It's just questions and answers? Well, they're asking me, like, why are you explaining each question and answer? And how is this going to help readers, who read like regular books? I was like, well, this isn't for regular book readers. These are for elite CI security professionals. It's hard to talk to someone who's not really in our sector and explain to them what my vision kind of was with this. Anyway, with the explanation section, the correct answer is identified in orange. Orange is like the whole theme of this book for some reason. I don't know. I like the vibrancy of that color. But really, the answer is the least important part of the explanation. Provided is a thorough understanding of why security is the answer to this question and why the other choices are not the answer. And much like the practice questions section, various tips of how to think like a manager, again, are on display, like the one on the top right, as well as a core CISSP concept, which is at the bottom left. So you'll see things like core CISSP concepts to know and how to think like a manager icons peppered throughout the book. That's the entire book. It's 25 questions of just this kind of layout. You get a question with an analysis of the choices, and then the answer on the next page with a complete explanation. It tells why it is important to get approval from management instead of just jumping in and fixing problems. The book tells you why it's important to perform a risk analysis after a major change or acquisition in an organization. And the book tells you how to handle questions with the words best, least, and most. Or the book can tell you why security should be embedded not just at the beginning, but every step of the software development lifecycle. I try to take some core concepts and tips from each of the CISSP domains in the common body of knowledge. Obviously, this book can't address every single core concept and tip and thinking methods that you have to know because they are endless, but I just accumulated what I've come to know over 6 years of being a CISSP instructor. And that's how it should be too, right? I mean, what's the point of CISSP practice questions if a full explanation isn't provided? Or at least some kind of explanation. That's all we want, right? Someone to explain something to us. Look, the CISSP is confusing enough. I wrote this book. I wrote this book in the same form as if that's what I would have wanted in a book about thinking like a manager. All right, let's look at how to use the book. After you've completed the book, I hope you can still take the same tips, strategies, and think like a manager concepts and apply them to other CISSP practice questions. Once you keep doing this, you will retain the same mindset when taking the real exam. Instead of having to force yourself to think like a manager, it will come naturally. That's why you will find sprinkled throughout the book graphical tips of how to think like a manager given a situation, core CISSP concepts, and exam essentials. The think like a manager icons are there to remind you about thinking of value, cost, and I lost my place. Where am I? It is the worst to lose your place when you're trying to talk about a book that you wrote and you just kind of lost your place. You know what? I'm going to leave this edit in just to show that not everything always goes perfect when making these videos. I'm not even going to edit this out. Where was I? Oh, the think like a manager icons. Yeah, that's right. I had to write a script for this last part because I couldn't wing it anymore. I just had to write the script. This last section I had to write it. So for the think like a manager icons, they're there to remind you about thinking of value, cost, processes, roles, responsibilities, and to keep yourself in the realm of high-level thinking. The core CISSP concept icons are there to provide just some basic concepts of information security that are paramount to know. The CISSP is a test of concepts because concepts do not change. Whether you're studying for the CISSP exam or hired as the Chief Information Security Officer for a global organization, the concepts are the same. Whether your kid has the flu at home or you're trying to contain a global pandemic, the concepts are the same. Whether you're trying to send a space shuttle to the moon for the first time or sending supply rockets to a base on the moon, which will eventually be the relay point for the voyage to Mars, the concepts can still be applied. They all use the same concepts. That is why the CISSP is a vendor-neutral exam. the concepts of which can be applied to organizations that have anywhere from 10 users to 100,000 users. Okay? And the exam essentials icon will just add on just a little bit of good study habits, just some good general test taking tips. Stips. They go into saying that you should go beyond your suggested CISSP books and venture into the realm of other sources, because you just can't use one source or two resources to study for the CISSP exam. You got to go beyond that. You got to really push yourself. Right? These exam essentials, they'll talk about how to study and what to study, and they will sharpen your sword for the exam itself. Okay? And when to use it? Well, that all really depends on experience. Say you're 6 months before your exam. If you were to get the book at this time, look, even I'll tell you, it's probably not worth it 6 months before the exam. Did I say a disclosure to this book? Yeah, as with all books, this book is not enough by itself to help you pass the exam. I would never flatter myself of ever saying something like that. Right? No single resource is enough. So if you get this book 6 months before the exam, it's going to be overwhelming. Most people who take the CISSP exam or start studying 6 months ahead think this is like a CCNA exam or a technical exam. So when they start reading stuff about business and management, they might not even think it's the right book for the CISSP, but it's just about value and cost. So things can be a little bit more overwhelming. At this point, when you're studying your CISSP exam, just try to read to understand. Don't try to memorize. Everyone goes in thinking, I got to memorize this, I got to memorize that. Yeah, you got to memorize some things, but you only memorize to make sure you understand. That's why reading is paramount. Read to understand, not memorize. There's nothing in this book that you need to memorize. Nothing. Not even those tips or goals or CISSP concepts. That shouldn't be something you're like, all right, make sure you remember that Luke Ahmed's book said to remember cost over value. That's not something you should remember. That's something you should just know. And the book and the entire CISSP documents and books can also be a warning at this time, 6 months before your exam, to let you know, like, hey, this is no joke. You better get ready. You better get ready to devote quite a bit of time of your life and sacrifice quite a bit of time of your life to pass this thing. This isn't the most prestigious security certification for nothing. Yeah, it takes a lot to get this done. This isn't just, I read this book that they said is the official study guide. I'm just going to read this and take the exam, and that's all it should be. I'll join this elite club of security professionals after doing that. No. 3 months before the exam, now you've read your book, you've done a bunch of practice questions, you've watched videos, you've paid for all sorts of things. And if you haven't gotten it now is when the book will start to frame your manager mindset. You've absorbed everything in the SIBACs, everything in the CBK book, 11th hour, the Sean Harris 7th edition, 8th edition, practice question engines. You've read all that, and now you're starting to hear, if you haven't figured it out yourself, others are telling you this is a manager level exam. You're probably reading study experiences. The Study Notes in Theory website has, I think, hundreds of CISSP study experiences. Just Google crack and CISSP, and you'll find everything on my website about how others crack their CISSP exam. And they always talk about thinking like a manager. And at this point, you should also start reading about exam strategies, time management, how many breaks you should take, how many questions you will face, what time is left, where your testing center is. Don't leave things like where the testing center is and their protocols a month before the exam. You need to know beforehand so you're not worrying about that, 6 days before test day. And at this point, try to understand the core concepts, because 3 months may seem like a long time until your exam date, but take it from me, this is when you should be basically ready to take the exam. And the additional 3 months is to finalize and understand all other concepts that may seem unfamiliar. That's a hard truth to take in, that you should be completely ready at the 3 month mark, and the rest of that time for the next 3 months is just complete review. I don't know how to explain that, but that's what should happen, especially with this book. You get it 3 months beforehand. This book isn't meant to be read once and then you're done. If you got the paperback of the book, it's a paperback and it's very bendable. Like I wanted it to be rolled up like a newspaper, so it can be stuck in your book bag or stuck in between the pages of your thick CISP books. It's supposed to go with you wherever, just so you can quickly browse through it for any kind of things you wanted to understand further, or apply whatever tips are in the book to other practice question engines. And a month before the exam, this book will teach you patience. This book will teach you discipline. And you will learn time management. All right, I'll be honest. Maybe not so much the time management because everybody thinks differently. But the length and the explanations and analysis of each question in this book will build your patience. It will build your discipline. There's only 25 questions in this book. Okay, I'll say that now so there's no confusion. So later you're not like, wow, this was a short book. I didn't expect such a short book, or I expected more for all the hype that I've been hearing about it. It's just 25 questions. Okay, I'm telling you that right now. I didn't write this book for the money. I got a professional job. I don't need the money from this book. I just know that the question of how to think like a manager went unanswered for years, and it had to be answered. Okay? That's it. And as I've said before, my book is not enough to pass the CISSP exam. I even put it inside the cover of the book. I said this book is not enough or responsible for you for the pass or failure of your exam. Right? If you fail the exam, it's not my responsibility. Although I will feel very bad, and I will do whatever I can to help you ace it next time. And even if you pass, I'm still not responsible for that. Whether you pass or fail, that's on you. Yeah, because the thing about the CISSP exam is that not my book, not other CISSP books, my website, any other website or test engine, and nothing else available is even close to the questions found on the real exam. This is why the CISSP is the CISSP. What you are doing by reading and studying is learning the concepts, the best security practices to be found in the best practices in the security field. The real exam doesn't care if you memorize any of the material. What it does is test if you can apply the concepts you learned to their questions. It's not a memorization exam. You have to first learn the concepts and then apply it by choosing the correct choice. Everybody would have a CISSP if it were that easy. The CISSP is not for those who need constant motivation. By studying, doing practice questions, and spending massive number of hours toward this thing, you are cultivating a discipline that will carry on with you for the rest of your life. Right now, if you're struggling, sacrificing, and staying up late nights on your journey to the CISSP, I wrote this book for you. You want to know how to think like a manager? I just poured my heart out and told you. I hope it was worth the time. When I started this CISSP thing, my goal was to be the #1 CISSP instructor in the entire world, without allowing anybody to even come close to what I was doing, without allowing anybody to even come close to match the vision that I had. But looking back, that was a superficial goal, unrealistic, selfish. The real prize was the difference that Study Notes in Theory has been making on people's journey to the CISSP. The journey is the prize. Good luck on the exam, and I thank you for watching.